Welcome back to Win It Real Estate. I'm Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh, and I'd like to talk about repealing the Dodd-Frank Act. It's a law that I have discussed on this show multiple times. I wish the bankers would be more vocal about what is happening in their small businesses, because this law is going to affect small banks and lending institutions in a way that will put these businesses out of business because of overregulation and the cost of this regulation. And this is a perfect example of a small business segment of our economy that is being adversely affected by policy. Christopher Dodd, Barney Frank. Barney Frank, one of the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So Dodd-Frank is also a perfect example of how powerful this Congressional Progressive Caucus truly is within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party that has been taken over by socialists. The case for repealing Dodd-Frank. Peter Wallison from the American Enterprise Institute published a paper, and it can be found as a publication of Hillsdale College, and it was published in November 2013. And I just want to talk a little bit about this from his perspective. I've just discussed it from a practical local market perspective, how it's going to affect the banking industry locally, the jobs in small lending and banking institutions, and also the real estate market, choice in getting loans. 1 out of every $2 that is lent to a small business comes from a small bank and lending institution. Again, this is local control of choice. A person can go to any bank they wish right now. A business can go to a number of small banks and lending institutions. That's choice. And Dodd-Frank will take away that choice. Now, the Republicans have been stalling the rollout of Dodd-Frank, but I do not believe they have been vocal enough about how critical it is to repeal this law. And it worries me that enough Republicans are not articulating how devastating this law will be to the banking industry in our country. I've talked about what created the housing bubble and burst. And if we look at the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, that was established in 1934, and it was authorized to insure mortgages up to 100%, but it required 20% down payment. And there were very, very few delinquencies for 25 years. However, due to the recession in 1957, Congress loosened those standards. And predictably, when the standards for mortgage down payments are loosened, it creates a bubble, and then there's a crash. And that is what happened under President Clinton with his housing goals. HUD decided that everybody that has a pulse should be a property owner. And that's simply not logical. But it fits into that social justice ideology of the Progressive Caucus, doesn't it? It definitely fits into the idea that everyone should be equal. And unless you're a homeowner, you certainly can't be equal with someone who's not a homeowner. This is a failed thought process. A failed thought process that destroyed a lot of lives. The Congressional Progressive Caucus has hurt a lot of people. And now we have from Barney Frank, this Progressive Caucus Democrat, Dodd-Frank. And Dodd-Frank was really pitched as being something that would protect the consumer. But in reality, it has nothing to do with protecting the consumer. Nothing at all. It has to do with control, just like Obamacare. Obamacare took 1/6 of the economy, and Dodd-Frank is going to take over lending by government controls. Take over choice. So there is no choice. One regulation at a time, one law at a time, removing our freedoms and choices in this country, destroying the free market. And that is why we do not have economic recovery. It is a progressive caucus thought process, this ideology that is destroying America, destroying the American dream. With the largest housing bubble in history deflating in 2007, and more than half of all mortgages made to borrowers who had weak credit or little equity in their homes, the number of delinquencies and defaults in 2008 was unprecedented. Again, this is from the Hillsdale College Pursuing Truth, Defending Liberty article that was written by Peter Wallison, The Case for Repealing Dodd-Frank. These aren't my words. He writes, one immediate effect was a collapse of the market for mortgage-backed securities that were issued by banks, investment banks, and subprime lenders, and held by banks, financial institutions, and other investors around the world. These were known as private label securities or private mortgage-backed securities to distinguish them from mortgage-backed securities issued by Fannie and Freddie. Investors were shocked by the sheer number of mortgage defaults that seemed to be underway, and they fled the market for private label securities. There were now no buyers, causing a sharp drop in market value for securities. And Barney Frank was saying at that time, there's no problem. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are solvent. They're doing just ducky. But in reality, the bubble was bursting in a big way. But the housing bubble was not caused by insufficient regulation. It was not caused by an unstable financial system. It was caused by government housing policies that forced the dominant factors into the trillion-dollar housing market, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to reduce their underwriting standards. And these lax standards then spread to the wider market, creating an enormous bubble and a financial system in which more than half of all mortgages were subprime or weak. Government policy created this, and it's worse now than before because Dodd-Frank, they pitched it as something that would tighten the regulations. But that wasn't the problem in the first place. They're pitching it, and it's a false pitch. The fact of the matter is, the only reason Dodd-Frank exists, this law, is because of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, because of people like Barney Frank, because they want one national bank, one federal control over lending, the government to pick and choose the winners and the losers, the businesses that will get money and those that will not, the have and have-nots, all in the name of redistribution of wealth and social justice. This is dangerously close to communism in a way that we have never seen in our country. We have been progressing towards socialism for many years, and now we have Obamacare. But this, my friends, Dodd-Frank, is scarier than Obamacare because it will collapse the financial institutions that we know and trust in the future. Regulation of the financial system through Dodd-Frank is the wrong response to what happened. It is so wrong that it is suspect in so many ways. These vast new regulations, the restrictions in this act, have created more uncertainty and have really taken away the ideal entrepreneurial motivation to take risk in our country. The answer should have been a reorientation of the U.S. housing finance system away from the kind of government control that makes it hostage to narrow political imperatives. These are not my words, but I agree with these words. Less government control would have created a recovery in our housing market. And instead, what we have in 2013, were record foreclosures. And every day in my business, I meet with people who are on the brink of walking away from their home, handing the keys back to the banks, who are buried, unemployed, and have no hope for the future as a homeowner. We have created a situation, and these are my words because I see it every day in my business. We have created a situation where towns like Norwich and New London have lost owner occupancy and have become cities of renters. The ideal goal of these progressive thinkers in Congress was that every person should be a homeowner, or was it? Perhaps that wasn't the goal. Perhaps the goal was to create a housing collapse, because of course this has happened many times before. Perhaps the goal was to make sure that there was no real homeownership, so that we are all renters, because that's the direction we're going in. And it's not just in finance. It is also in land use and regulations. FHFA is going to control who gets loans and who does not. HUD is going to determine what is built and what is not built in our communities by taking over local zoning controls. These are facts that exist right now in our communities, and we need to smarten up, and we need to wake up and understand these policies that are being implemented in the state of Connecticut through the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C., in Congress. If you want to take a look at a very shocking publication, please go to the Connecticut Fair Housing Center and look up their Mapping Communities publication that was published in 2013. Read the introduction page. After you read it, and your hair doesn't turn white, and you aren't filled with fear at what these progressives are trying to accomplish in our country, then I guess it just doesn't matter, does it? Because if you're not going to do the research, if you're not going to look into these details, don't be shocked at what happens next. Our freedoms and liberties, our Constitution needs to be protected because it's only a piece of paper with writing on it. We need to protect our Constitution, our liberties, our freedoms. And voting, registering to vote, and getting to the polls in November is essential to stop this tidal wave of progressive, damaging legislation, to reverse this trend. We cannot accept it. This cannot be the new norm. We have to fight it. I want your help in fighting that. I need your help in fighting that. If you like this show, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, go to LoriForCongress.com, sign up, and help us make change that we know works and that is not a fairy tale. Less regulation, less taxation, less government control over our lives. Those are proven solutions to our problems. We have to undo the damage that has been done, and the time to do it is 2014, November 2014. Thank you for listening today, and listen every Sunday from 11 to noon. I'm Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh, and you're listening to 94.9 FM News Now and Stimulating Talk Radio.